The dust swirled around Katherine Hayes's worn boots as she stood on the porch of her late father's ranch, watching the tax collector's wagon roll up the dirt path like an omen of disaster. Her hands trembled as she clutched the letter that had arrived 3 days prior, demanding payment of back taxes that would strip her of everything she had left in this world. The August sun beat down mercilessly on Taylor, Texas, in 1878, and Katherine felt every bit as scorched as the parched earth beneath her feet. The tax collector stepped down from his wagon, a thin man in a black suit that seemed too fine for the dusty roads of this frontier town. His name was Jeremiah Colt, and he had a reputation for squeezing every last cent from struggling ranchers, often leaving families destitute in his wake. Katherine had heard the stories whispered in town about how he worked in cahoots with wealthy land speculators who would swoop in and buy properties for pennies on the dollar after Colt declared them forfeit. "Miss Hayes," Colt called out, tipping his hat with mock courtesy. "I trust you received my correspondence regarding the outstanding tax debt on this property." Katherine's throat tightened. "Mr. Colt, there must be some mistake. My father paid his taxes faithfully every year until his death 6 months ago. I have the receipts." "Those receipts are for previous years, Miss Hayes. What you owe now includes penalties and interest that have accumulated during the transition of ownership, as well as a reassessment of the property value." He pulled out a ledger and flipped through the pages. "According to my calculations, you owe the state of Texas $753. The number hit Katherine like a physical blow. She had maybe $40 to her name, and that was after selling off most of the cattle her father had worked his whole life to accumulate. "That cannot be right. This ranch was assessed at a fraction of that value just last year." Colt's lips curved into something that might have been a smile if it had contained any warmth. "Values change, Miss Hayes. The railroad is coming through, and property along this corridor has increased substantially in worth. You should be grateful your land is so valuable." "Grateful?" Katherine's voice rose despite her efforts to remain calm. "How can I be grateful when you are demanding money I do not have? This is my home. My father built this ranch with his own 2 hands." "That is not my concern," Colt said, his voice hardening. "The tax debt is real and legally binding. You have until the end of the month to pay, or the property will be seized and sold at auction." Katherine's vision blurred with tears she refused to shed in front of this vulture of a man. She had nowhere to go, no family left to turn to. Her mother had died when she was just a girl, and her father had been her whole world. Now she stood alone, facing the loss of everything he had worked for. "I need more time," she said, hating the desperation in her voice. "The law allows no extensions," Colt replied. He closed his ledger with a snap. "End of the month, Miss Hayes. Good day." That was when Katherine heard the sound of horse hooves on the hard, packed earth. She looked up to see a man riding toward them on a massive black stallion, and even from a distance, she could tell he was unlike anyone she had seen in Taylor before. He sat tall in the saddle, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the blazing sky, and as he drew closer, Katherine found herself staring at a figure that seemed pulled straight from the wild mountains themselves. The man dismounted with fluid grace despite his considerable size. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders that strained against his buckskin shirt and arms that showed corded muscle even through the worn leather. His hair fell past his shoulders in dark waves that caught the sunlight, and his face was tanned and weathered from years spent outdoors. A thick beard covered his jaw, but it could not hide the strong lines of his features or the intensity of his gray-blue eyes. "Afternoon," the stranger said, his voice a deep rumble that seemed to vibrate in Katherine's chest. He addressed Colt first, his gaze sweeping over the tax collector with barely concealed disdain. "You seem to be conducting business on this lady's property." Colt straightened his jacket, clearly trying to maintain his authority in the face of this mountain of a man. "This is official government business. It does not concern you." "I am making it my concern," the stranger replied evenly. He turned to Katherine, and his expression softened slightly. "Are you all right, miss?" Katherine found her voice, though it came out smaller than she intended. "He says I owe over $700 in back taxes. I cannot pay it." The mountain man's jaw tightened, and he turned back to Colt. "Let me see that assessment." "As I said, this does not concern you," Colt protested, but there was a nervous edge to his voice now. The stranger took a single step forward, and despite not making any threatening gesture, something in his bearing made Colt take an involuntary step back. "I am making it my concern," he repeated, each word deliberate. "Now show me the assessment." With shaking hands, Colt opened his ledger and held it out. The mountain man studied the pages, his eyes scanning the numbers with an intelligence that belied his rough appearance. After a long moment, he looked up, and there was steel in his gaze. "This assessment is fraudulent," he said flatly. "I know this land. I have passed through this territory many times in the past 5 years. This ranch is worth maybe $300 at most, and that is being generous. The tax on that would be no more than $20, even with your so-called penalties." Colt's face flushed red. "How dare you question official documentation? I could have you arrested for interfering with government business." "You could try," the mountain man said, his tone almost conversational. "But I am guessing the local sheriff might be interested to know about your creative bookkeeping." "I have seen your kind before, Colt. You inflate the assessments, drive people off their land, and then your friends buy it up for nothing. It is a tidy little scheme." "These are serious accusations," Colt sputtered. "You have no proof." The stranger reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a worn leather notebook. "I keep records of every place I pass through. Property values, water rights, livestock counts. Call it a habit from my surveying days. I have the real assessment values for every ranch in this county, including this one. Would you like me to share them with the authorities?" The silence that followed was heavy with tension. Katherine watched as Colt's bluster deflated like a punctured bladder. His eyes darted between the mountain man and his wagon, clearly calculating his options. "What is the real amount owed?" the stranger asked, his voice quiet but commanding. Colt licked his lips. $22.50, Katherine gasped. The difference was staggering and confirmed her worst suspicions about the tax collector's intentions. The mountain man reached into his pocket and pulled out a leather pouch. He counted out coins with deliberate precision, then held them out to Colt. $22.50. Not a penny more. Colt took the money with trembling hands. "This is not over," he muttered. "Yes, it is," the stranger said. "And if I hear of you trying this scheme on anyone else in this county, those records I mentioned will find their way to the Texas Rangers. Do we understand each other?" Colt nodded mutely, then scrambled back to his wagon. Within moments, he was driving away in a cloud of dust, leaving Katherine and her unexpected savior standing in the sudden quiet of the afternoon. Katherine turned to the man who had just saved her home, her mind reeling with questions and gratitude and confusion all tangled together. "I do not know how to thank you," she began, her voice breaking. "You just saved everything I have in this world, and I do not even know your name." The mountain man removed his hat, revealing more of that wild mane of hair. Up close, she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the small scar above his left eyebrow, the way his gaze held both strength and surprising gentleness. "Name's Vincent Kane. Most folks just call me Kane." Katherine Hayes, she replied, feeling suddenly self-conscious under his steady regard. Mr. Kane, I cannot accept such charity. $22 is still money I do not have right now, but I will pay you back. I swear it. Not charity, Kane said, settling his hat back on his head. Call it an investment in doing what is right. I have seen too many good people lose everything to vultures like Colt. Besides, he added, a hint of warmth entering his voice, I have been on the trail for 3 months. I could use a decent meal and maybe a place to rest my horse for the night if you would be willing to trade. Katherine felt relief and something else, something warm and unexpected, bloom in her chest. That is the least I can do. Please come inside. I was just about to start supper. As Kane led his stallion to the small barn, Katherine hurried into the house, her mind spinning. She quickly surveyed her meager pantry and began pulling out ingredients for a meal. She had flour, some salt pork, beans, a few eggs from her chickens, and vegetables from her small garden. It was not much, but she was determined to give this man the best meal she could manage. By the time Kane knocked on the door, freshly washed from the pump outside, Katherine had biscuits in the oven and beans simmering on the stove. She had also changed from her dusty work dress into something cleaner, though she told herself it was just about being presentable, and had nothing to do with the way Kane's eyes seemed to see right through to her soul. "Smells good," Kane said as he entered, having to duck slightly to clear the doorframe. In the confines of her small house, he seemed even larger, his presence filling the space in a way that should have been intimidating but somehow was not. "It is nothing fancy," Katherine said, busying herself with setting the table, "but it is hot and filling." They sat across from each other at the worn wooden table her father had made, and for a moment Katherine felt the weight of his absence like a physical ache. Kane seemed to sense her shift in mood. "How long has it been?" he asked gently. "Since you lost your father, 6 months," Katherine replied, surprised by how easy it was to talk to this stranger. "He took sick suddenly. By the time the doctor came out from town, there was nothing to be done. Pneumonia took him in 3 days. I am sorry for your loss," Kane said, and she could tell he meant it. "It is not easy running a ranch alone, especially not for someone like me," Katherine finished, a touch of defensiveness creeping into her voice. "A woman," Kane shook his head. "I was going to say someone so young. How old are you, if you do not mind my asking?" 22, Katherine said. "Old enough to know how to work hard and take care of what is mine." "I do not doubt that," Kane replied, respect evident in his tone. "What about help? Do you have any ranch hands?" Katherine's expression grew bitter. "I had 2 until last month, but without money to pay them, they moved on to other work. I have been managing on my own, but it is getting harder. Most of the cattle are gone. I sold them to pay for Father's burial and to keep food on the table. All I have left are a dozen head, some chickens, and a milk cow." Kane ate in thoughtful silence for a moment, and Katherine found herself studying him when she thought he was not looking. There was something compelling about him, a sense of self-sufficiency and strength that came from years of surviving in harsh conditions. His hands were large and calloused, the hands of a man who knew hard work intimately. Yet they moved with surprising grace as he handled his fork and knife. "Where are you headed?" Katherine asked, suddenly curious about this man who had appeared in her life like an answer to a prayer she had not known she was praying. "Nowhere in particular," Kane said. "I spend most of my time in the mountains to the west. I trap, hunt, scout for wagon trains sometimes. I come down to civilization every few months to sell furs and stock up on supplies. Taylor is just one stop on my route." "You must be very lonely," Katherine said before she could stop herself, then felt her cheeks flush. "I am sorry. That was presumptuous of me." Kane's lips curved into a small smile, the first real smile she had seen from him. It transformed his face, softening the hard edges and revealing a warmth that took her breath away. "You are not wrong. It can be lonely, but it is the life I chose after the war." "You fought?" Katherine asked. Kane nodded, his expression growing somber again. "I did. Saw things no man should see. When it was over, I found I could not go back to regular life. The mountains offered peace, or at least quiet. I have been up there for near about 13 years now." Katherine did the math in her head. That would make him somewhere in his early 30s, she guessed. Old enough to have lived a full life, young enough to still have strength and vitality. She found herself wondering what his story was, what had driven him to solitude, what dreams he carried in his heart. "You ever think about settling down?" she asked, then immediately wanted to take the words back. Why was she asking him such personal questions? But Kane did not seem offended. He leaned back in his chair, studying her with those penetrating gray-blue eyes. "I have thought about it from time to time, but settling requires something worth settling for. A man needs a reason to give up his wandering ways." The air between them felt suddenly charged with something Katherine could not name. She dropped her gaze to her plate, her heart beating faster than it should. "More biscuits," she offered, her voice higher than normal. Kane accepted, and they finished the meal with easier conversation about the land, the weather, the quirks of ranch life. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Kane helped Katherine clear the dishes, insisting despite her protests. "My mother raised me to be useful," he said with that small smile again. "And it has been a long time since I had company for a meal. Feels right to help clean up." After the dishes were done, they stepped out onto the porch to catch the evening breeze. The temperature had dropped to something almost pleasant, and the first stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Kane rolled a cigarette, offering it to Katherine first, which she declined with a shake of her head. "Thank you again for what you did today," Katherine said softly. "I know I already said it, but I truly do not know what would have happened if you had not arrived when you did." Kane exhaled smoke slowly. "You would have found a way. You strike me as the kind of woman who does not give up easy." "I feel like I am barely holding on," Katherine admitted, surprised by her own honesty. There was something about the gathering darkness and Kane's solid presence that made confession easy. "Every day is a struggle. I do not know how much longer I can keep this place running on my own." "Then do not do it alone," Kane said simply. Katherine looked at him, her heart skipping. "What do you mean?" Kane was quiet for a long moment, seeming to wrestle with something internal. Finally he spoke, his words measured and careful. "I could stay for a while, help you get things sorted out. Fix up what needs fixing, help with the cattle, in exchange for meals and a place to sleep in the barn." "I cannot ask that of you," Katherine protested, even as hope flared in her chest. "You have your own life, your own plans." "You are not asking. I am offering," Kane said. He turned to face her fully, and in the dim light from the window, his expression was serious and intent. "Truth is, Miss Hayes, I saw something today that stirred my blood in a way it has not been stirred in a long time. The way Colt was trying to steal from you, the injustice of it, it reminded me why I fought in that war. To protect people who cannot protect themselves. To stand up against wrong when I see it. Let me do that now." Katherine felt tears prick her eyes, a combination of relief and gratitude and something deeper, something she was afraid to examine too closely. "All right," she whispered, "but only if you let me pay you back properly once I am on my feet again." Kane nodded. "Deal." They shook hands, and Katherine felt the warmth and strength of his grip send a shiver through her entire body. She pulled her hand back quickly, confused by her reaction to this man she had only just met. "I will get you some blankets for the barn," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "There is a cot out there that should be serviceable." "I have slept on worse," Kane assured her. That night, lying in her narrow bed in the house, Katherine stared at the ceiling and tried to calm her racing thoughts. Everything had changed so suddenly. This morning, she had been facing ruin, and now she had a mountain man sleeping in her barn who had not only saved her home but promised to help her rebuild her life. It felt like a dream, too good to be real. But as she drifted off to sleep, Katherine allowed herself to hope for the first time in months. Maybe, just maybe, things were going to be all right. The next morning, Katherine woke before dawn as was her habit and dressed quickly in her work clothes. She made coffee and a simple breakfast of eggs and leftover biscuits, then stepped out onto the porch to find Kane already up and working. He had mucked out the barn, fed and watered his horse along with her animals, and was now examining the fence line near the house. "Morning," he called when he saw her. "Hope you do not mind, but I figured I would make myself useful." Katherine felt warmth spread through her chest. It had been so long since she'd had help with the endless daily tasks. "You do not have to start this early. Come have some breakfast first." Over coffee, they discussed the work that needed doing. The list was extensive. Fences that needed mending, a leaky roof on the barn, the well pump that was starting to stick, and the general state of disrepair that had crept in during her father's illness and the months since his death. "We will tackle it bit by bit," Kane said, his confidence infectious. "Rome was not built in a day, and this ranch will not be fixed in one either, but we will get there." They fell into a routine over the following days. Kane would rise with the sun and work until dark, his strength and knowledge proving invaluable. He repaired fences with expert hands, patched the barn roof, and fixed the well pump with a combination of skill and patience. Katherine worked alongside him when she could, though she also had to maintain the house, tend the garden, and care for the animals. In the evenings, they would share meals and conversation. Katherine learned that Kane had grown up in Missouri, the youngest of 5 brothers. He had learned tracking and hunting from his father, who had been a mountain man himself before settling down. The war had taken 2 of his brothers and scattered the rest to the winds. Afterward, unable to bear the memories that haunted every corner of his childhood home, Kane had headed west and up into the mountains, seeking solitude and peace. "You ever see your family?" Katherine asked one evening as they sat on the porch after supper. Kane shook his head. "My parents passed before the war. My remaining brothers and I lost touch. I suppose I could find them if I tried, but some distances are not just about miles. The war changed us all, made us into strangers." Katherine understood that kind of loss, the way death and distance could hollow out a person's life. "I wish I had siblings," she said softly. "After Mother died, it was just Father and me. He did his best, taught me everything he knew about running this ranch. But he never remarried, never gave me brothers or sisters. I think he loved my mother too much to ever consider replacing her." "That is a kind of love most people never find," Kane observed. "Worth treasuring, even if it means being alone." As the days turned into weeks, Katherine began to notice changes in herself. She laughed more easily, smiled more often. The crushing weight of loneliness that had been her constant companion since her father's death began to lift. And it was not just the help with the ranch work, though that was considerable. It was Kane himself, his steady presence, his quiet strength, the way he seemed to understand her without need for many words. She caught herself watching him as he worked, admiring the play of muscles beneath his shirt, the competent way he handled every task. She noticed small details, the way his hair caught the sunlight, the sound of his deep laugh when something amused him, the gentleness with which he treated the animals despite his rough appearance. And sometimes she caught him watching her too. His gaze would linger on her face when he thought she was not looking, soft and contemplative. Those moments sent her heart racing and made her acutely aware of every movement of her body, every word she spoke. One afternoon, they were working together to move some heavy logs Cain had cut to reinforce a weak section of the barn. Katherine bent to lift one end, but Cain stopped her with a hand on her arm. "Let me get that," he said. "It is too heavy." "I am not fragile," Katherine protested, a bit of her independence flaring up. "I have been doing this work alone for months." Cain's expression was serious. "I know you are not fragile. You are one of the strongest people I have ever met, Katherine. But there is a difference between being strong and being foolish. That log weighs as much as you do. Let me carry it." The way he said her name, the warmth and respect in his voice, made her objections die on her lips. She stepped back and watched as he hefted the log with apparent ease, his muscles bunching and releasing with the effort. When he looked back at her, there was something in his eyes that made her breath catch. "Katherine," he said slowly, as if testing the weight of what he was about to say. "I need to tell you something." Her heart hammered in her chest. "What is it?" But before he could answer, the sound of approaching horses interrupted them. Katherine turned to see 3 riders coming up the path toward the ranch. She recognized one of them immediately. Gerald Thornton, one of the wealthiest landowners in the county, and a man who had been trying to buy her father's ranch for years. Thornton was in his 50s, portly and red-faced, with the kind of confidence that came from too much money and too little opposition. The 2 men flanking him looked like hired muscle, all hard eyes and holstered guns. "Miss Hayes," Thornton called out as he reined in his horse. His eyes flicked to Cain, and something like annoyance crossed his face. "I heard you had a visitor. I came to discuss a business proposition." "Mr. Thornton," Katherine said coolly, "I have told you before this ranch is not for sale." Now," Thornton said in a patronizing tone that set Katherine's teeth on edge. "Let us be reasonable. I heard about your unfortunate situation with the back taxes. Very distressing, I am sure, but I am here to offer you a solution. I will buy this land from you for a fair price, enough to settle your debts and give you a fresh start elsewhere." "The tax debt has been settled," Katherine said firmly. "And as I said, this ranch is not for sale at any price." Thornton's eyes narrowed, and he looked at Cain with open hostility. "I see. And who might you be, interfering in local business?" Cain stepped forward, positioning himself slightly in front of Katherine in a protective gesture that was both subtle and unmistakable. "Name is Vincent Cain. I am a friend of Miss Hayes, helping her run her ranch." "Not that it is any concern of yours." "Everything in this county concerns me," Thornton said, his voice hardening. "And I do not appreciate outsiders coming in and disrupting carefully laid plans." "Carefully laid plans," Cain repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. "You mean your scheme with Colt to drive Miss Hayes off her land with fraudulent tax assessments? Those carefully laid plans." Thornton's face flushed even redder. "I do not know what you are talking about. But I will warn you, Mr. Cain. It is not healthy to make accusations you cannot prove against men of standing in this community." "Is that a threat?" Cain asked, and though his tone remained calm, Katherine could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands had moved closer to his sides. She knew instinctively that Cain was not a man to start a fight, but he was absolutely a man who could finish one. One of Thornton's men moved his hand toward his gun, but Cain's gaze snapped to him so fast and with such intensity that the man froze. In that moment, Katherine saw something in Cain that he usually kept hidden. a cold, lethal competence born of years surviving in dangerous places. He might live in the mountains now, but this was a man who had walked through war and come out the other side. "I think you gentlemen should leave," Katherine said, her voice shaking but determined. "You have heard my answer. This ranch is not for sale, not now and not ever." Thornton stared at her for a long moment, then at Kane. Finally, he jerked his horse's reins around. "You are making a mistake, Miss Hayes, both of you. This is not over." They rode away in a cloud of dust, and Katherine felt her knees go weak with relief and residual fear. Kane's hand was at her elbow instantly, steadying her. "You all right?" he asked, his voice gentle again. Katherine nodded, then shook her head, then found herself laughing shakily. "I do not know what I am. That man terrifies me. He has so much power, so much influence. What if he comes back? What if he tries something worse than fake tax assessments? Then I will be here," Kane said simply. "And I promise you, Katherine, no one is taking this land from you. Not while I am drawing breath." The intensity of his words, the absolute conviction in his voice, made Katherine's eyes fill with tears. Without thinking, she turned into him, and suddenly his arms were around her, strong and warm and safe. She pressed her face against his chest and let herself shake, releasing the fear and stress she had been holding inside. Kane held her carefully, one large hand cradling the back of her head, the other arm wrapped securely around her shoulders. She could hear his heartbeat, steady and strong, and smell the scent of him. Leather and wood smoke and something wild and clean like pine forests. "I have got you," he murmured against her hair. "You are safe. I promise." They stood like that for a long moment, and when Katherine finally pulled back, she looked up to find Kane gazing down at her with an expression that made her entire body flush with heat. His gray-blue eyes had darkened to the color of a stormy sky, and there was a hunger in them that both thrilled and frightened her. "Katherine," he said, his voice rough, "that thing I was trying to tell you before. I need you to know that staying here, it is not just about helping with the ranch anymore. It has not been for a while now." "What do you mean?" she whispered, though some part of her already knew, already felt the truth of it in the way her heart raced when he was near. Kane lifted his hand and gently traced the line of her jaw with his fingertips, the touch so tender it made her tremble. "I mean that somewhere between fixing fences and sharing meals, I stopped thinking about leaving. I started thinking about staying. About what it might be like to build a life here. With you." Katherine could hardly breathe. "Kane, You do not have to say anything," he said quickly. "I know I am just a mountain man with nothing to offer but my hands and my back. You deserve better, someone educated and refined. But I cannot keep pretending I do not feel what I feel. These past weeks with you have been the best of my life. You make me want things I thought I gave up on years ago." "What things?" Katherine asked, her voice barely audible. "A home," Kane said simply. "A reason to come down from the mountains and stay. Someone to wake up next to build something with. A future." Katherine felt like she was standing on the edge of a precipice, about to leap into unknown territory. Everything sensible told her to be cautious, to remember that she had only known this man for a few weeks. But her heart, her foolish, hopeful heart, was singing a different song entirely. "You are not just a mountain man," she said, reaching up to touch his bearded face. "You are the man who saved my home, who works from dawn until dark without complaint, who makes me laugh and makes me feel safe and makes me believe that maybe I do not have to face everything alone. You are everything I did not know I needed, Kane. And these weeks with you have been the best of my life, too." The smile that broke across Kane's face was like sunrise, brilliant and transforming. "Katherine, can I kiss you?" In answer, she rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, both of them learning the shape and feel of each other. Then Kane's arms tightened around her, pulling her flush against his solid body, and the kiss deepened, became something urgent and consuming. Katherine had been kissed before, awkward fumbling attempts from boys in town who saw her as a potential conquest. But this was nothing like those clumsy encounters. Kane kissed her like she was precious and necessary, like he was a man dying of thirst and she was cool water. His lips moved against hers with a confidence that came from maturity and patience, taking his time, savoring every moment. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Kane rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that for 2 weeks," he admitted, his voice rough with emotion. "Only 2 weeks," Katherine teased, feeling giddy and wild and more alive than she had felt in years. "I have been thinking about it since the day you arrived." Kane laughed, the sound rich and full of joy. He kissed her again, softer this time, then pulled back to look at her seriously. "Katherine, I need you to understand something. If we do this, if we build something together, I am not going anywhere. I do not do things halfway. When I commit fully." "I would not want it any other way," Katherine said. "But Kane, you love the mountains. I cannot ask you to give that up for me." "You are not asking. I am choosing," Kane said firmly. "And the mountains will still be there. Maybe we will go up there together sometimes. But my place is here now with you." Over the following weeks, their relationship deepened and blossomed. They worked side by side during the day, and in the evenings they sat close together on the porch, talking about everything and nothing. Kane told her stories of his years in the wilderness, of tracking grizzly bears through snow, of nights spent under star-filled skies so vast they seemed to swallow the world. Katherine shared her dreams for the ranch, her memories of her parents, her fears and hopes for the future. They kissed often, stolen moments of sweetness that left Katherine dizzy and wanting more. But Kane was always respectful, always careful not to push beyond what was proper. His restraint, born of genuine respect for her, only made Katherine fall harder for him. The ranch began to thrive under their combined efforts. Kane's knowledge of the land and animals proved invaluable. He helped Katherine increase her cattle, herd through smart trades with neighboring ranchers, improved the water supply by digging a new irrigation channel from the creek, and even built additional corrals that would allow them to take on more livestock. Word spread through the county about the mountain man who had taken up residence at the Hayes Ranch, and it generated both gossip and grudging respect. Kane made regular trips into Taylor for supplies, and though some people looked at him with suspicion, others recognized him for what he was, an honest man doing honest work. 2 months after Kane's arrival, Katherine and Kane rode into town together for supplies. As they walked through the general store, Katherine was acutely aware of the stares and whispers that followed them. She held her head high, refusing to be cowed by small-town gossip. They were loading supplies into the wagon when Sheriff Tom Garrett approached them. Garrett was a fair man in his 50s, and Katherine had always respected him. "Miss Hayes, Mr. Kane," Garrett said, tipping his hat. "I wanted to let you know that I received some interesting information this week. Seems the Texas Rangers have been investigating Jeremiah Colt and his activities across several counties. They found quite a pattern of inflated tax assessments and property seizures. Mr. Kane, I understand you had some documentation that helped their investigation." Kane nodded. "I sent them copies of my survey notes, figured they might find them useful." "More than useful," Garrett said with satisfaction. "Colt has been arrested along with several of his associates, including Gerald Thornton." Katherine gasped. "Thornton was arrested?" "Turns out he was behind the whole operation," Garrett explained. Colt would drive people off their land with fake tax debts, and Thornton would buy the properties for pennies at auction. They had quite the scheme going. But it is over now, thanks in large part to Mr. Kane here. The state is reviewing all of Colt's assessments from the past 5 years and making restitution where appropriate. Relief flooded through Katherine so powerfully she felt dizzy. The threat that had hung over her, the fear of powerful men coming after her land, was finally gone. She looked at Kane and found him watching her with quiet satisfaction. "Thank you, Sheriff," Kane said. "Justice is always worth the effort." As they drove back to the ranch, Katherine reached over and took Kane's hand. "You did not just save me once," she said softly. "You saved me twice." "You keep saving me." Kane squeezed her hand gently. "You saved yourself, Katherine. You just needed someone to stand beside you while you did it." That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Kane shifted in his chair. Katherine could tell he was nervous about something, and her heartbeat quickened. "Katherine," he began, then stopped and started again. "I have been thinking about the future, about what I want my life to look like, and every time I picture it, you are there." Katherine turned to face him fully, her breath caught in her throat. Kane stood and held out his hand. When she took it, he pulled her to her feet and then, to her shock and delight, lowered himself to one knee. From his pocket, he pulled out a simple ring, a band of silver with a small but beautiful turquoise stone set in it. "I made this myself," Kane said, his voice rough with emotion. "The stone is from the mountains, from a place where I spent a winter years ago. It was one of the loneliest times of my life, and I remember thinking that I would never find someone to share my life with. But then I met you, and everything changed." Tears streamed down Katherine's face as Kane continued. "You are the bravest, strongest, most beautiful woman I have ever known. You make me want to be a better man. You make me believe in the future. Katherine Hayes, would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" "Yes," Katherine said, the word bursting out of her like it had been waiting her whole life to be spoken. "Yes, Kane, 1,000 times yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly. Then he stood and swept her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that made her toes curl and her heart sing. When they finally broke apart, both laughing and crying at once, Katherine looked at the ring on her finger and felt like the luckiest woman in all of Texas. "When?" she asked. "When can we get married?" Kane grinned. "As soon as you want. Tomorrow, if you will have me." "Tomorrow seems perfect," Katherine said, kissing him again. In truth, it took a week to arrange everything, though those days passed in a blur of joy and preparation. They were married in the small church in Taylor on a clear September morning in 1878, with half the town in attendance. Katherine wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved all these years, and carried wildflowers that Kane had picked from the meadow near the ranch. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Kane kissed her with such tenderness that several women in the congregation sighed audibly. Katherine felt like her heart might burst from happiness. The reception was held at the ranch, with neighbors bringing food and music and well wishes. As Katherine danced with her new husband under the Texas sky, she marveled at how much her life had changed in just a few short months. She had gone from facing ruin and loneliness to being married to a man she loved more than she had thought possible. That night, Kane carried her over the threshold of the house that was now truly theirs. He set her down gently in the bedroom and cupped her face in his large, calloused hands. "My wife," he said, wonder in his voice. "Katherine Kane." "I like the sound of that," Katherine said, smiling through happy tears. "What do we do now, husband?" Kane's answering smile was full of promise and heat and love. "Now we start our life together, and it is going to be extraordinary." He kissed her then, and Katherine gave herself over to the moment to him, to the future they would build together. The night was filled with whispered words and gentle touches, with the discovery of each other and the forging of a bond that would last a lifetime. The first year of their marriage was both challenging and wonderful. The ranch prospered under their joint management, with Kane's wilderness skills and Katherine's organizational talents proving to be a formidable combination. They expanded their cattle herd, improved their water systems, and even began trading horses, which Kane had a particular talent for training. But more than the material success, it was the daily joy of partnership that made Katherine's heart full. She loved waking up next to Kane, loved the way he would pull her close in the early morning light and kiss her temple. She loved working beside him, the comfortable silence between them born of deep understanding. She loved the way he looked at her, like she was the most precious thing in his world. Kane was an attentive and passionate husband, always making sure Katherine felt loved and cherished. He would surprise her with small gifts, a bouquet of wildflowers, a smooth stone from the creek, a piece of polished wood he had carved into the shape of a horse. He would sit with her in the evenings and read aloud from books they ordered from catalogs, his deep voice bringing the stories to life. And when winter came and the work slowed, Kane would hold Katherine close by the fire and tell her stories of his years in the mountains, of the beauty and danger he had witnessed, of the solitude that had shaped him into the man he was. Katherine would listen and trace the scars on his hands, each one a testament to the life he had lived before her. "You miss it?" she asked him one snowy evening. "The mountains, the freedom of going wherever you wanted." Kane pulled her closer, his arms a warm cage around her. "Sometimes I miss the simplicity of it. But Katherine, what I have here with you is worth 1,000 lifetimes in the wilderness. You are my home now. You are my adventure." In the spring of their second year together, Katherine discovered she was pregnant. She told Kane over breakfast, watching his face carefully for his reaction. For a moment, he simply stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then a slow smile spread across his face, transforming him into something incandescent with joy. "A baby," he said, his voice thick. "We are going to have a baby," Katherine nodded, laughing and crying at the same time. "Are you happy?" Kane swept her up into his arms, careful despite his enthusiasm. "Happy, Katherine, I am beyond happy. I am overwhelmed. I am terrified and excited and grateful. You are giving me a family. You are giving me everything." He set her down gently and immediately became protective to an almost comical degree. He insisted she stop doing heavy work, fussed over her constantly, and read every book about pregnancy and childbirth he could get his hands on. Katherine found his concern both touching and occasionally frustrating, but she could not deny it made her feel deeply loved. As her belly grew round with their child, Kane would talk to the baby, his large hands spread over her stomach, telling stories and making promises about the life they would have together. He built a cradle from polished oak, every joint perfect, every surface smooth as silk. He carved animals into the headboard, horses and bears and eagles, all the creatures of the wilderness that had been his companions for so many years. Their son was born on a cold December night in 1879, coming into the world with a lusty cry that made both parents laugh through their tears. They named him James Daniel Kane, after both their fathers, and he was perfect in every way. He had Kane's gray-blue eyes and Katherine's delicate features, and from his first moments, he owned their hearts completely. Kane was a devoted father, taking to the role with the same intensity he brought to everything else. He would walk the floor at night when James cried, singing old songs in his deep voice until the baby quieted. He changed diapers without complaint, helped with feedings, and stared at his son with such open adoration that Katherine sometimes had to look away to hide her tears of joy. "I never thought I would have this," Cain confessed one night as they lay in bed with baby James sleeping between them in his cradle. "A wife, a child, a real home. I thought I was meant to be alone, but you changed everything, Katherine. You gave me a reason to believe in happiness again." "You did the same for me," Katherine said softly. "When you stepped between me and Colt that day, you did not just save my ranch. You saved my future. You saved me." As James grew from infant to toddler, the ranch continued to thrive. Cain had proved himself to be not just a capable rancher, but a shrewd businessman as well. He negotiated fair prices for their cattle, established trading relationships with other ranchers, and even contracted with the army to provide horses. The Hayes-Cain Ranch became one of the most successful in the county, a far cry from the struggling property it had been when they met. But more important than financial success was the happiness that permeated their lives. James was a bright, curious child who loved following his father around the ranch, toddling after Cain on chubby legs and chattering in his own special language. Cain had infinite patience with his son, teaching him about animals and the land with the same care he had once used to teach himself to survive in the wilderness. When James was 3 years old, Katherine discovered she was pregnant again. This time, she told Cain while they were working together in the barn, and he picked her up and spun her around, laughing like a man half his age. "Another baby," he said, kissing her soundly. "We are blessed, Katherine. We are so incredibly blessed." Their daughter was born in the spring of 1883, a tiny, fierce creature with dark hair and her father's gray-blue eyes. They named her Sarah Rose Cain, after Katherine's mother, and she completed their family in a way Katherine had not even known was missing. Cain was just as devoted to Sarah as he was to James, though he admitted with chagrin that having a daughter terrified him in ways a son never had. "She is so small," he would say, holding Sarah's tiny hand in his massive palm. "How am I supposed to protect something so precious?" "The same way you protected me," Katherine would remind him, "with your strength, your courage, and your heart." The years rolled by in a procession of seasons and small moments. James grew into a tall, serious boy who had his father's love of the land and his mother's quick mind. Sarah was a whirlwind of energy and curiosity, fearless and full of laughter. The ranch prospered, expanding to include more acreage and livestock. Cain's hair began to show threads of silver at the temples, and lines deepened around his eyes. But to Katherine, he only became more handsome with age. He was still strong, still capable, still the mountain of a man who had stepped into her life and changed everything. And every day, he made sure Katherine knew she was loved. They would still sit on the porch in the evenings after the children were asleep, holding hands and watching the sunset. Cain would tell Katherine about his day, and she would share her own thoughts and observations. It was comfortable and familiar, yet never boring. After all these years, Katherine still found new depths to discover in her husband, new reasons to love him. "You ever think about that day?" Katherine asked one evening when James was 7 and Sarah was 4. "The day you rode up and found Colt trying to steal my ranch," Cain smiled, that same small, warm smile that had captured her heart years ago. "I think about it all the time. Best decision I ever made, stopping to help a beautiful woman in trouble." "Best thing that ever happened to me, you stopping," Katherine replied. "Sometimes I try to imagine what my life would be like if you had not come along, and I cannot. It is like trying to picture the sky without stars." "You are such a fundamental part of who I am now." Cain brought her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. "You know what I realized recently? I thought I knew what it meant to be strong when I was up in those mountains alone. I survived harsh winters, dangerous animals, and complete isolation. I thought that made me tough. But real strength is not about surviving alone. It is about choosing to be vulnerable, to let someone in, to build a life with another person. You taught me that, Katherine. You made me stronger than I ever was in the wilderness. Katherine leaned her head against his broad shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady rise and fall of his breathing. We made each other stronger, she said. That is what love does. As the children grew older, Cain began teaching them the skills he had learned in his years as a mountain man. He took James hunting and tracking, teaching him to read the land and respect the animals they pursued. He showed Sarah how to identify medicinal plants, how to find water in dry conditions, and how to start a fire with nothing but flint and steel. Both children adored their father and hung on his every word. But Cain also made sure they understood the value of education and civilization. He and Katherine hired a tutor from town to ensure James and Sarah could read, write, and cipher. They wanted their children to have choices in life, to be able to make their own paths rather than being limited by circumstance. "The world is changing," Cain said to Katherine one night. "The railroad is coming, towns are growing. Our children need to be prepared for a different world than the one we grew up in." "You sound almost wistful," Katherine observed. Cain shrugged. "There are things I will miss about the old ways, the openness, the freedom. But there are things I will not miss too. The violence, the lawlessness, the way people like Colt and Thornton could prey on others with impunity. If the new world means more justice, more opportunity for people to build good lives, then I welcome it." In 1888, when James was 9 and Sarah was 5, Cain and Katherine decided to take their family on a trip into the mountains. Cain had not been back to his old haunts since marrying Katherine, and he wanted to share that part of his life with his children. They spent 2 weeks in the wilderness, camping under the stars and living off the land. Cain taught the children how to fish in cold mountain streams, how to track deer through the forest, and how to find shelter in the wild. James thrived in the environment, his natural skills blooming under his father's guidance. Even little Sarah proved surprisingly capable, her fearlessness serving her well in the rugged terrain. For Katherine, seeing Cain in his element was a revelation. He moved through the mountains with a confidence and grace that was different from his ranch persona. Here, he was completely at home, reading the land like a familiar book. And yet, when he looked at her and the children, his expression was one of complete contentment. "This is who I was," Cain said one evening as they sat around the campfire, the children already asleep in their bedrolls. "But you and the kids, the ranch, that is who I am now, and I would not trade it for anything. Not even for this." Katherine asked, gesturing at the vast wilderness surrounding them, the star-filled sky overhead. Cain pulled her close and kissed her temple. "Not even for this. The mountains are beautiful, but they are empty. You filled my life with meaning, Katherine. You gave me a purpose beyond just surviving. You gave me a reason to live." When they returned to the ranch, Katherine found herself pregnant once more. This pregnancy was harder than the previous 2, and there were moments when she felt older than her years. But Cain was there every step of the way, caring for her with a tenderness that made her fall in love with him all over again. Their second daughter was born in early 1889, a tiny, delicate baby they named Elizabeth Grace Cain. She was different from Sarah, quieter and more contemplative, but just as loved. Cain held his newborn daughter and wept openly, overwhelmed by the gift of another child. "3 babies," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "3 perfect, beautiful children. How did I get so lucky?" "We both got lucky," Katherine reminded him. "The day you rode into my life, we both got lucky." The 1890s brought more changes. James grew into a young man who was the spitting image of his father, tall, broad-shouldered, and with the same quiet strength that characterized Cain. He took to ranching naturally, and showed signs of being an even better businessman than his father. Sarah, now a spirited 10-year-old, had her mother's determination and her father's love of adventure. And little Elizabeth, at 3 years old, was already showing signs of being the family's peacemaker, with a gentle nature that charmed everyone she met. Cain's hair had gone completely silver by now, though he was still as strong and capable as ever. Katherine had a few gray strands of her own, and lines around her eyes that came from years of smiling. They were no longer young, but their love had only deepened with time. One evening in 1893, as they celebrated their 15th wedding anniversary, Cain presented Katherine with a gift, a beautiful leather-bound journal filled with his writings. She opened it to find page after page of his thoughts, memories, and expressions of love written in his careful hand. "I started writing this the day after we got married," Cain explained. "I wanted to capture every moment, every feeling, so that someday, when we are old and gray, we can look back and remember how it all began." Katherine read through the entries with tears streaming down her face, overwhelmed by the depth of emotion in every word. He had written about the first time he saw her, standing on that porch facing down Colt. He had written about falling in love with her, about their first kiss, about the day they married. He had written about the births of each of their children, about ordinary days and extraordinary moments. "This is the most beautiful gift anyone has ever given me," Katherine said, closing the journal carefully. "Cain, you have given me so many things over the years. You gave me my home, my security, my family. But most importantly, you gave me yourself, and that has made all the difference." Cain took her hands in his. "You want to know the truth, Katherine? I did not save you that day with Colt. You saved me. I was half alive, just going through the motions of existing, but you gave me a reason to truly live. You took a broken, lonely man and showed him what it meant to be whole. Everything good in my life started the day I met you." They kissed then, with the same passion and tenderness that had characterized their relationship from the beginning. 15 years of marriage had not diminished their desire for each other, had not made their connection any less intense. If anything, time had only strengthened the bond between them. As the century drew to a close, the Cain family was prosperous and happy. The ranch now covered several thousand acres and employed multiple ranch hands. James, at 20, was being groomed to eventually take over the operation. Sarah, at 16, was being courted by several young men from town, much to Cain's consternation and Katherine's amusement. And Elizabeth, at 10, was showing signs of inheriting her mother's business acumen, already keeping careful accounts of the ranch's expenses. Cain and Katherine were now in their 40s, still healthy and active, but increasingly aware of the passage of time. They made a point of taking time for themselves, of maintaining the romance that had brought them together. They would still sit on the porch in the evenings, holding hands and talking. They would steal kisses in the barn when they thought no one was looking. They would take rides together across the ranch land, sometimes racing their horses like carefree youngsters. "I want you to know something," Cain said to Katherine one spring evening in 1899, as they watched the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. "If I had my life to live over, knowing everything I know now, I would not change a single thing. Every hardship, every lonely year in the mountains, every mistake I made, it all led me to you, and that makes it all worthwhile." Katherine squeezed his hand, her heart full to bursting. "The same is true for me. Even losing my father, as painful as that was, it brought you into my life. And you have given me more joy than I ever thought possible." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Then Cain spoke again, his voice thoughtful. "You remember what I said to Colt that day, that I would pay what was fair and not a penny more?" Katherine nodded. "Of course I remember. It was one of the most impressive things I had ever seen." Cain smiled. "I have been thinking about that lately, about fairness and payment and what we owe the world, and I realized something. Everything I have given you over the years, all the work and protection and love, it does not come close to balancing the scales. Because what you gave me in return is priceless. You gave me a life worth living. How do you put a price on that?" "You do not," Katherine said softly. "Love is not a transaction, Cain. It is a gift we give freely, expecting nothing in return. And the miracle is that when both people give that gift, you end up with something greater than either of you could have imagined alone." "Wise words from a wise woman," Cain said, pulling her close. "I love you, Katherine Cain, today, tomorrow, and for all the days we have left." "I love you too," Katherine replied. "My mountain man, my protector, my partner, my love." As the new century dawned, the Cain family entered it together, united by bonds of love that had been forged in adversity and strengthened by time. James eventually married a sweet young woman from a neighboring ranch and began building his own family. Sarah, after breaking half a dozen hearts, finally fell in love with a schoolteacher from Austin who appreciated her wild spirit. And Elizabeth, the quiet, thoughtful one, surprised everyone by declaring she wanted to become a doctor and heading off to medical school back east. Cain and Katherine became grandparents, delighting in the new generation while also enjoying the peace that came with having raised their own children successfully. They were fixtures in the community now, respected elders who had built something lasting and good. In 1905, on their 27th wedding anniversary, Cain and Katherine took a trip back to the spot where they had first met. The ranch house had been expanded and improved over the years, but the original structure still stood, a testament to the past. They stood on the porch where Katherine had faced down the tax collector all those years ago, and Cain wrapped his arms around his wife from behind, resting his chin on her head. "You ever wonder what your life would have been like if I had not stopped that day?" Cain asked. Katherine turned in his arms to face him. They were both in their 50s now, gray-haired and weather-worn, but the love in their eyes was as bright as ever. "I try not to think about it," she admitted, "because the alternative is too terrible to contemplate." "You were not just in the right place at the right time, Cain. You were meant to be there. We were meant to find each other." "I believe that," Cain said. "I believe some things are meant to be, and us, Katherine, we were always meant to be." They kissed there on that porch, the same spot where their story had begun, and Katherine felt the same flutter in her heart that she had felt on that first kiss all those years ago. Time had not diminished their love. It had only made it deeper, richer, more complex and beautiful. As they grew older, Cain and Katherine continued to work the ranch together, though they gradually handed more responsibilities over to James and his growing family. They spent their days in easy companionship, doing the work they loved alongside the person they loved most. And in the evenings, they would sit on their porch, watching sunsets and counting their blessings. Cain's strength remained impressive even as he aged. He was still the broad-shouldered, muscular man Katherine had fallen in love with, though his hair was now completely white and his face bore the deep lines of a life well lived. And Katherine, though she moved a bit slower than she once had, still possessed the determination and fire that had allowed her to stand up to corrupt tax collectors and build a successful ranch against all odds. In 1910, on their 32nd anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a celebration. As Katherine looked around at the family they had built together, at the legacy of love and hard work they had created, she felt a profound sense of gratitude and completion. That evening, after the guests had left and the house was quiet, Kane led Katherine out to the porch one more time. The stars were brilliant overhead, and the night air was soft and warm. 32 years, Kane said, shaking his head in wonder. Seems like yesterday and like forever ago all at once. The best 32 years of my life, Katherine said. Every single day with you has been a gift, Kane. Kane pulled her close, and they swayed together in the starlight, dancing to music only they could hear. I stood between you and that tax collector because it was the right thing to do, Kane said softly. I paid what was fair and not a penny more because I do not believe in letting bullies win. But Katherine, what I got in return was worth more than all the gold in California. I got you. I got a family. I got a life filled with love and meaning. If that is not the best bargain a man ever made, I do not know what is. Katherine laughed through happy tears. We both won that day. We both got exactly what we needed, even if we did not know it at the time. They stood there together under the vast Texas sky, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful. The ranch stretched out around them, a testament to their hard work and determination. Inside the house, photographs and mementos told the story of their life together. And in their hearts, the love that had sustained them through everything burned as bright as ever. As the years continued to pass, Kane and Katherine aged with grace and dignity, still partners in every sense of the word. They watched their grandchildren grow and begin to have children of their own. They saw the world change around them, with automobiles replacing horses and telephones connecting distant families. But through it all, they remained constant, a living example of what true love looked like. In 1915, when they celebrated their 37th anniversary, Kane surprised Katherine with another trip to the mountains. They traveled with less speed than they once had, but with no less enjoyment. They camped under the stars just as they had done with their children all those years ago. And Kane told Katherine stories of his solitary years, stories she had heard 100 times but never tired of. I used to think I was happy up here alone, Kane said one evening as they watched the sunset paint the mountain peaks in shades of gold and crimson. I convinced myself that I did not need anyone, that solitude was strength. But I was wrong, Katherine. I was not happy. I was just surviving. You taught me the difference. Katherine rested her head on his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, unchanged despite the decades. And you taught me that I did not have to face everything alone, that accepting help and love is not weakness, but wisdom. We learned a lot together, Kane said with a smile. And we are still learning. I hope we never stop, Katherine replied. When they returned from their mountain trip, Katherine fell ill with a fever that worried Kane deeply. But she recovered after a few weeks, and they both acknowledged that they were not as young as they once were. It made them more conscious of treasuring every moment, of saying the things that mattered, of showing love in both grand gestures and tiny daily kindnesses. On their 40th anniversary in 1918, the entire family gathered once again. There were now great-grandchildren running around the ranch, squealing with delight at the wide open spaces and the animals. James was a grandfather himself now, running the ranch with the same integrity his father had shown. Sarah had settled in Austin with her teacher husband and a brood of intellectual, spirited children. And Elizabeth had become a respected doctor in San Antonio, breaking barriers and saving lives. As Cain and Katherine stood before their assembled family, Cain raised his glass in a toast. 40 years ago, I was a lonely mountain man with no plans beyond the next season. Then, I met a brave young woman who was standing up to an unjust man, and my whole life changed. Katherine, you have been my partner, my lover, my best friend, and my reason for everything. You made me want to be better, do better, build something lasting, and look what we have created together. He gestured at the family surrounding them, at the prosperous ranch, at the life they had built from scratch. This is what love can do when two people commit to each other fully. This is what is possible when you stand up for what is right and work hard for what you want. I am so grateful for every day I have had with you, Katherine, and I look forward to every day we have left. Katherine stood and kissed her husband to the applause and cheers of their family. You saved me in every way a person can be saved, she said, her voice thick with emotion. You gave me love, security, family, and purpose. But most of all, you gave me yourself, and that has been the greatest gift of all. As the celebration continued around them, Cain and Katherine slipped away to their favorite spot on the porch. They sat in their usual chairs, holding hands as they had done thousands of times before, watching the sun set over the land they had tamed together. No regrets, Cain asked softly. Not a single one, Katherine replied. You? Only that I did not meet you sooner, Cain said with a smile. But then again, maybe we met exactly when we were supposed to. Maybe we both needed to walk our separate paths before we were ready to walk together. I think you are right, Katherine agreed. Everything happened exactly as it was meant to happen. And we ended up right where we were supposed to be. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge, the same stars they had watched together for 40 years. And in that moment, Katherine felt a profound sense of peace and completion. This was what she had been meant for all along. Not just to run a ranch or raise a family, but to love and be loved by Vincent Cain, the mountain man who had stood between her and disaster and changed her life forever. As the years advanced into the 1920s, Cain and Katherine entered their twilight years with grace. They no longer worked the ranch actively, leaving that to younger generations, but they remained its heart and soul. They spent their days in quiet contentment, tending a small garden, receiving visits from children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and simply enjoying each other's company. Cain's once powerful body had been diminished somewhat by age, but he remained upright and strong in spirit. His white hair and beard gave him the look of a patriarch, wise and weathered. And Katherine, though she moved slowly now and tired easily, still had the same fire in her eyes that had first caught Cain's attention all those years ago. They would often be found on their porch in the evenings, holding hands and talking softly. Sometimes they reminisced about the early days of their marriage, laughing over the challenges they had faced and overcome together. Sometimes they talked about their children and the lives they had built. And sometimes they just sat in silence, needing no words to communicate the depth of their love and contentment. In 1923, as they approached their 45th anniversary, Katherine fell ill again. This time, the fever was more serious, and despite Elizabeth's best efforts as a doctor, it became clear that Katherine's body was finally beginning to fail. Cain never left her side during her illness, holding her hand and talking to her softly, reminding her of all the beautiful moments they had shared. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of color outside their bedroom window, Katherine squeezed Cain's hand weakly. "Do you remember that first sunset we watched together?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "After I paid off Colt," Cain said, his own voice rough with unshed tears. "How could I forget? It was the beginning of everything." "It was perfect," Katherine said with a faint smile. Every sunset since then has been perfect because I watched it with you. Katherine, Cain said, leaning close, you are not leaving me. You are going to recover, and we are going to watch many more sunsets together. But Katherine shook her head slightly. We have had so many already, my love. More than most people ever get, and every single one was a blessing. She reached up with trembling fingers to touch his bearded face. Thank you for a beautiful life, Vincent Cain. Thank you for loving me so well. It was easy, Cain said, tears finally spilling down his weathered cheeks. Loving you was the easiest thing I ever did. Katherine smiled, and in that smile Cain saw the young woman she had been, brave and beautiful and unafraid. I will wait for you, she whispered. Wherever I am going, I will wait. I will find you, Cain promised. In this life or the next, I will always find you. Katherine took one last breath, squeezed Cain's hand one final time, and slipped away as peacefully as the setting sun. Cain held her for a long time, his tears falling silently onto her still face, mourning the loss of his partner, his love, his reason for being. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people, a testament to the respect and affection Katherine had earned over her lifetime. But Cain barely noticed the crowds. He stood before her grave with his children around him and felt like half of his soul had been torn away. In the months that followed, Cain struggled to find his footing without Katherine. The ranch continued its operations. The family rallied around him, but nothing could fill the Katherine-shaped hole in his life. He spent hours sitting on their porch, staring at her empty chair, remembering the thousands of evenings they had shared there. But Cain was a strong man, tempered by hardship and sustained by love, and gradually he found a way forward. He took comfort in his children and grandchildren, in the legacy he and Katherine had built together. He told stories about their life together to anyone who would listen, keeping her memory alive with words. And every evening, without fail, Cain would sit on that porch and watch the sunset. In those moments, he felt Katherine's presence so strongly it was almost like she was sitting beside him. He would talk to her, telling her about his day, updating her on the family, expressing his love across the veil that separated them. 2 years after Katherine's death, on what would have been their 47th anniversary, Cain sat on the porch one last time. He was 83 years old now, his body finally succumbing to the weight of years. James sat with him, holding his father's hand as Cain had once held Katherine's. "Tell me again, Pa," James said softly. "About the day you met Ma." Cain smiled, his eyes distant with memory. "I was just passing through Taylor when I saw this brave young woman standing up to a corrupt tax collector. She was outnumbered and outgunned, but she was not backing down. I took one look at her and knew my traveling days were over. I rode up to that ranch and paid what was fair, not a penny more. Best investment I ever made." "You loved her very much," James said. "More than life," Cain replied. "She was my everything, your mother. She took a broken, lonely man and gave him a reason to live. She gave me you and your sisters. She gave me a home. She gave me 45 years of happiness I never thought I would have." Cain's breathing had become labored, and James gripped his father's hand tighter. "I love you, Pa." "I love you too, son," Cain said. "But I am tired now, so tired, and your mother is waiting for me. I can feel her calling me home." As the sun set in a final blaze of glory, Cain closed his eyes and took his last breath. His face relaxed into an expression of profound peace, and James could have sworn he saw a smile touch his father's lips at the very end. Vincent Cain was laid to rest beside Katherine Hayes Cain, reunited at last. Their gravestone bore a simple inscription: "Mountain Man and the woman he loved together forever." The ranch continued to prosper under James's stewardship and eventually passed to his children and grandchildren. The story of Cain and Catherine became family legend, told and retold at gatherings, a reminder of what true love looked like. The porch where they had spent so many evenings together became a sacred space, preserved carefully by each generation. And sometimes, on clear evenings when the sunset painted the sky in brilliant colors, family members would swear they could feel the presence of Cain and Catherine there, still holding hands, still watching the beauty of the world they had loved so much, still together as they always would be. Their story lived on as a testament to the power of love, courage, and standing up for what was right. It reminded people that sometimes, paying what is fair and not a penny more is not just about money, but about justice, integrity, and the courage to protect those who need protecting. And it showed that, when two people find each other against all odds and commit to building a life together, they can create something beautiful that echoes through generations. The mountain man who had once walked alone through wilderness had found his home in the heart of a brave woman. And together, they had built not just a ranch, but a legacy of love that would endure long after they were gone. Their story was complete, their ending happy, their love eternal.